Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2025 library tour. In this episode, day 2 of Science Fiction and Fantasy Week. First up is Lies of Dissent by Troy Carl Bucher. This is... I'm not entirely sure if it's a standalone fantasy or the abandoned first volume of, an abandoned series. This book came out late in 2019 and was one of the books that I attempted to read at the time that sounded the death knell of my love of prose science fiction and fantasy. I do not quite recall what this story is about, except for it's about 2 or 3 young people who are taken in by like a wizard, a nomadic people, and some kind of order of super knights or something. Anyway, I think it will be exiting my collection. Next is Fireheart's Tiger by Elliot de Bodard. This is a short novel or novella from Tor.com and is about a young princess who has a toxic relationship with a princess from a colonial power. Did not particularly care for this book. Or novel, novella, whatever the hell it is. The next 3 books are by Samuel R. Delany. First up is Dahlgren. This is a post-apocalyptic dystopic novel set in a ruined city. I've had this book in my collection for nearly 19 years, and I tried it once, did not succeed, and I've been debating whether or not I should give it another go. I'm still not entirely sure, so I think I'll probably keep it on the keep pile. Although maybe not the other 2 books of his that I have. Next is The Fall of the Towers, which is a omnibus edition, not much of an omnibus edition, of Out of the Dead City, The Towers of Toron, and A City of a Thousand Suns. Have not read these yet. And I also have Triton, which is a space opera that I read for Space Opera September, which I forgot to mention what Space Opera September is or was yesterday. So Space Opera September is a month-long reading event in which participants read space opera over the course of September. It was hosted by SFF 180. I don't know if it is still ongoing or not. I haven't really kept up with his channel. Did not particularly get on with Triton, though. The next 3 books are by Lynn Llewellyn. They are part of the Night Runner series. Luck in the Shadows, Stalking Darkness, and Trader's Moon. I'm not entirely sure why I have these in my collection. It's, I think, Llewellyn's first series. I did read part of another series by her, and I guess that got me wanting to pick these up, but I haven't gotten to them, and they've been in my collection for almost 10 years, so they probably could go. And I don't think I'll feel much sorrow for that. Next up is The Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayton. This is a science fantasy set in a near future South Africa that has a lot of promise, but there is just something missing. The Door into Fire by Diane Duane. I've heard that this book is a foundational text in queer science fiction and fantasy, although I have not yet read it. And so I guess I'll keep it. And if it's not read, to hell with it. Anyway, next is Vellum by Hal Duncan. Again, I'm not entirely sure why I have this in my collection. It's a weird science fiction novel based on the myth of Inanna, her relationship with Dumuzi, and her descent into the underworld. I had to go at this book 15 years ago or so. Did not like it, and I'm not entirely sure why I added it to my collection, except for it was at Golden's Book Exchange. Next is The Forgetting Moon, the first book in the Five Warrior Angels trilogy by Brian Lee Durfee. Brian Lee Durfee is something of a darling in this particular booktube community amongst those of us who are fans of science fiction and fantasy. I'm not entirely sure I get the appeal. I tried this book a year or two ago and did not get on with it, so it will be going. Another book I'm not entirely sure why I have is Seven Princes, Books of the Shaper, Volume 1 by John R. Fowles. This is a recent sword and sorcery novel that I guess I picked up because I was amazed Book People had, not Book People, Golden's Book Exchange had it, but I've had this book for a long time now and I haven't gotten to it for Bill Redemption, so I'm not going to get to it. The next two books are by Neil Gaiman. First up is American Gods. This is, I'm assuming it's a classic of 21st century fantasy. It is about an ex-convict named Shadow Moon who is hired to be an errand boy by a mysterious figure known as Mr. Wednesday, who is an incarnation of the god Odin. In the setting, mythological gods or incarnations of mythological gods have immigrated to the United States and have over the decades and centuries lost much of their power. They are in contention with new gods, the gods of technology, over, I guess, religious control of the United States, and ultimately it's all revealed to be one long con. I've had this book twice in my collection. The first time about 20 years ago when I did not get on with it, and then I finally read it when I checked it out from the library, and a few years ago I got a desire to add it to my collection, although I'm not entirely sure I want to keep it. I'm not really all that interested in rereading American Gods right now. I have yet to read Neverwhere, also by Neil Gaiman. Not entirely sure what it's about. Let's reorganize the... There we go. One of the problems about the shelving units is that they are quite flimsy and have a tendency for the books to tip over, which is one of the reasons why I will actually be quite glad to see the back of them. So the next two books are by Brian Camp. First up is The City of Lost Fortunes. This is a novel set post-Katrina. It's about a man named Jude Dubuisson who has the ability to find lost people and objects. Since Hurricane Katrina, Jude has absented himself from the supernatural community of New Orleans until he is dragged back to play a godly game of poker, with the fate of New Orleans being the prize. I like the novel quite a bit. I've read it a few times, but I don't think that's really reason enough to keep it in my collection. I'm a lot less fond of the sequel, Gather the Fortunes. This book is about a secondary character from the first book, Renaissance, who has become a psychopomp. Part of her exists in the mortal world, and she collects the souls of the recently deceased and guides them to the gateway to the underworld, where another aspect of her will guide them the rest of the way to face their judgment. While this is going on, there's some shenanigans going on that only Renaissance can deal with. This book lacks all of the magic that City of Lost Fortunes had, honestly. The next three books are the Prince of Nothing series by R. Scott Baker. The Darkness That Comes Before, which is the first book in the series and the only one that I have read. I checked it out twice from the library, Bill the first time, managed to read it the second time, and I guess I had a desire to pick it up, and I eventually did, the whole trilogy, and never got around to rereading this or reading the rest of it, and I don't think I have an intention to. So the other two books in the series are The Warrior Prophet and The Thousandfold Thought. Moving on to the next shelf. The Ingenious by D.R. Sinks. This is a weird novel about a gigantic city that can travel through dimensions. And the city grows by incorporating bits of other cities and locations and worlds that it appears near. The city is ruled by a corrupt group of alchemists, and ultimately one of them tries to usurp authority, and he manipulates a young gang member to do it, although she has her own agenda. Not terribly good. Next is the Prince of Thorns, Book 1 of the Broken Empire by Mark Lawrence. This is about a psychopathic, evil little shit who tries to overthrow his equally evil, shitty father. And I found this book just loathsome in the one chapter I read of it. Breath of Earth by Beth Cato. I don't remember much about this, except that I didn't particularly care for it. So the next batch of books are by Peter V. Brett. They are the Demon Cycle, which starts with The Warded Man, which I tried a year or two ago and just did not connect to. The other books in the series are The Core, which is the actual final book in the series. The Skull Throne, which is the fourth book. The second book is The Desert Spear. And the third book is The Daylight War. So the next four books are by, Ozma Zehenet Khan. They are the Khorasan Archive. The series starts with The Blood Print. So the Khorasan Archive is a series, quartet, that is set in either a fantasy world inspired by Central Asia or a post-apocalyptic future, because of course Coruscant and many other place locations are actually historical places here in our world. So the plot of The Bloodprint is that the main characters are part of an all-women's order of priestess sorceresses who are trying to save women from being enslaved by this evil fundamentalist figure called the One-Eyed Prophet, and who's, in addition to enslaving women, he's also obsessed with eradicating literacy. So our heroes go in search of the Bloodprint, a first edition of this magical holy book that is the source of everybody's magical powers, and things go from there. This was a Bill redemption. I did manage to read it and did collect the other 3 volumes in the quartet. Although my interest in concluding the series, it's not there. So, second book is The Black Khan. The third book is The Blue Eye, which I have read those too. And Diminishing Returns. And the fourth book is The Blade Bone. So the next batch of books are by Tanith Lee, starting with Tales from the Flat Earth, which includes the novels Night's Master, Death's Master, and Delusion's Master. I read the first 2 of the 3, and I didn't particularly care for either one, and so I'm not entirely sure why I ultimately decided to pick this omnibus edition up, because I'd read it from the library. But I do have a tendency to do this, where whether I get on with the book or not, I will go ahead and pick it up and then just let it molder in my collection until this point where I get rid of it. But anyway, I'll talk a bit about that when I talk about my reading history in a few weeks. This next one is The Secret Book of Paradise, also by Tanith Lee. Have not gotten around to it, and I've had this one for over 10 years now, I think. The next 3 are the Unicorn Trilogy, Black Unicorn, Gold Unicorn, and Red Unicorn. Also by Tanith Lee is The Heroine of the World, and Faces Underwater, which is the first book in the Secret Books of Venus, which is a fantasy version of Venice. This book is set during their version of Carnival, and I think involves magic masks or something. Tanith Lee has a rather poetic style, which is, I think, Marmite or cilantro or hit or miss, or however you want to approach it. And I don't know, I want to like her work, but I don't think ultimately I do. Because I have read this, and honestly, there's a reason why I have not gone out of my way to find the other volumes in that series. The next 2 books are by Ursula K. Le Guin. First up is The Dispossessed. This is a space opera set on a planet and its inhabited moon. The moon is populated by political refugees, anarchists. One of these anarchists is a scientist who has developed a means of faster than light or near instantaneous communication across vast distances. He's not appreciated or getting the support he wants from his homeland. So he returns to the planet that his moon orbits. In one of the countries there, it's hyper-capitalistic and exploitative. And another one is basically your standard communist totalitarian state. And eventually the scientist goes to Earth. I read this, decades ago. Because I was TAing for a class. And this was one of the textbooks. And I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. And I'm like, why do I have this in my collection? Outside of perhaps a case that if you are a fan of science fiction and fantasy, you really should have Ursula K. Le Guin in your collection. This next book is an omnibus of 5 novels by Le Guin: Left Hand of Darkness, Rokinan's World, Planet of Exile, City of Illusions, and the word for world is forest, which I have read. And it's okay, but nothing too really spectacular. And finally, Trial of Flowers by Jay Lake. This is one of the City Imperishable, which I don't know much about. So I'm not entirely sure if I want to keep this or not. Probably not. Anyway, BookTube, that concludes day 2 of Science Fiction Week of my 2025 library tour. I will be back tomorrow with day 3 and on until I finish science fiction and fantasy. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.